We'll be starting in just a few minutes. We'd like to let everyone in. And as you see in the message, please feel free to share with us where you're joining us from. We'll start in just a moment. Let's get started. Welcome to the January 2025 National University Speaker Series. My name is Dr. Nancy Roland Heinrich, and I have the honor of serving as the Executive Vice President of Community Engagement for National University. I am proud to be the founder and host of our NU Speaker Series. So today we appreciate all of you attending, whether you are currently a student, an alum, faculty, staff, or a community member. We certainly welcome those participating for the first time as well, because our speaker series is open to all interested participants. Since we started in 2020, we've held nearly 50 different webinars with notable subject matter experts, fabulous speakers on a wide variety of topics. And tonight, I promise you, you will be pleased. Know that our past speaker series have been recorded and they're posted on the National University alumni website. Just a moment to tell you about National University. We were started in 1971 by a retired U.S. Navy captain, Dr. David Chagos. I am pleased to share that I have been with National University for 45 years, so I was hired by Dr. Chagos. National has a rich history of providing accessible and relevant higher education programs to meet the needs of non-traditional working and military students, and this has been consistent since we were founded. Currently, 50% of our undergraduate students remain military affiliated. We serve 50,000 academic students enrolled in more than 100 different degree programs at the undergraduate, graduate, and doctoral level. And NU now has a combined alumni network of 245,000 graduates. But today we're here to listen to a very interesting topic entitled Becoming an Authentic Leader. Our presenter today is Dr. Ron Glickman, who currently serves as the Chief Information Officer, CIO of Trader Joe's. His extensive business career is working with executives at high level, leading high performance teams. And he has shaped his perspective on authentic leadership based on his experience and applying it to today's environment. Dr. Glickman is also an award-winning author of a leadership book entitled Lead for a Change. He will enlighten you with 2 transformative leadership superpowers that can help empower professionals at any career level to unlock their human and leadership potential. Think about performing while transforming. And I'm pleased to share that Ron is a distinguished alum from National University, completing both his BBA from NU as well as his AAS, his BBA in 1980 and his AAS in 1979. For today's webinar, you are privileged to have a dynamic duo of accomplished leaders, authors, and also NU graduates. Today's moderator for the speaker series is another NU alum, Dr. Julie Ducharme, who was featured in a prior webinar and will be conducting the moderator role today. Julie earned her MBA from NU in 2002. She serves as the CEO of She Talks, is a well-known speaker, successful consultant, and best-selling author. Julie specializes in empowering female executives. So today's topic and key messages could be applicable to a very broad audience who are listening tonight. Please listen to the key strategies on how you can become an authentic leader. Dr. Glickman's insight will help you better understand more on how you can be performing while transforming. I know our audience loves to ask questions of our presenters, so please submit your questions in the Q&A, and those will be addressed by our moderator, Julie Ducharme, following the presentation. So at this time, it is my pleasure to turn the program over to Dr. Ron Glickman. Audience, I truly hope you enjoy this discussion.
Thank you, Nancy. Hello, everybody. Thank you for that very warm introduction. Let me see if I can share my screen successfully. It's always terrible when a technologist cannot manage his Zoom controls. All right. You see my slides okay? Good to go? All right. Well, thanks for having me. It's a pleasure to be here. This evening, I want to talk about two leadership superpowers. And I want to start by defining leadership to just provide some context. There are tons of theories about leaders and leadership, and I want to just set the context briefly. Then I'll talk about the power of self-authoring and the power of emotional intelligence and how they relate to becoming an authentic leader. And we'll leave time at the end for an exchange of insights and some Q&A. So I want to start by challenging the traditional thought and talk about the difference between the leader and the process of leadership. And I love this definition by Brené Brown. She says that a leader is anyone who takes responsibility for finding potential in people and processes, and who has the courage to develop that potential. I think the first thing of note is that she's not talking about project management, financial management, strategy, or marketing. She's talking about the processes that we do every day to deliver outcomes and the people who engage in making those processes happen on behalf of an organization. I think it's also noteworthy that she uses the word courage because trying to make things better, trying to release potential in people and processes means it may not work. It might not work for an individual, it might not work for a company, but if we don't make the effort, we're never going to know. And so often people we work with have blind spots about whether they can lead or should lead, and we'll talk more about that in a couple of minutes. The process of leadership was defined by Comives and a group of authors who wrote a book for college students who are interested in leadership. And I really like their definition. They talk about the process of leadership being a relational and ethical process. So positivity, trying to do good, working people together, attempting to accomplish positive change. The political discourse in this country is difficult, a lot of challenging things going on. But for me, we're talking about an interpersonal dynamic, working with other people to make things happen. The other reason that I share these definitions is processes can be taught. And if a process can be taught, therefore it can be learned. And so everybody, in my view, and my research confirmed, has the potential to be a leader. It doesn't matter what you look like, where you were born, how much money you make, who you are married to, how you identify. All of us can be leaders. And that's really what I want to talk about for the rest of our time together this afternoon. There's a specific leadership theory that I came across when I was doing my research called authentic leadership. And this emerged after 9/11 when the country was in turmoil and people were looking for a different type of leadership. And authentic leadership is defined as a real, genuine, and sincere leadership style, one that inspires trust and loyalty, as well as strong performances from followers. Becoming an authentic leader is a lifelong process. It's the process of leadership and learning to do it, but from your own strengths, your own character, your own way of being. It's not cookie cutter. It's not something that has to be done the same way. And being an authentic leader, you have to prepare, you have to practice, and you have to be willing to learn from both your mistakes as well as your successes. And when we can get into that mindset around developing our leadership potential, it really can be a game changer. The key thing about being authentic is we're all very different. And so I really like this quote by Joan Clark. Joan was an engineer during World War II, and she worked for the British government, and she ended up cracking the Nazi encryption code, the code that they used to decide where to direct bombers to bomb the Allied forces. So this is a woman who, at that time, women were not supposed to be engineers. They weren't supposed to be working in government, and she did an amazing thing. And upon reflection, she said, sometimes it's the people who no one imagines anything of who do the things that no one can imagine. And it's so important for us to look for potential in the people that we're working with and not let our biases get in the way of helping people become the best humans and the best leaders that they can be. All right, so the first superpower I want to talk to you about is called the superpower of self-authoring. And self-authoring was, the theory was developed by a woman named Baxter McGolda. She did research on people between the ages of 18 to 30 and tried to figure out, from a human development perspective, how do we grow? How do we become the best people that we can be? And her research found that there were three specific competencies that those who become the best that they can be tend to gravitate toward and work on understanding and getting better at. The first, she said, were intrapersonal competencies. So understanding ourselves, understanding what drives us, what ticks us off, what motivates us, what our purpose is. Very, very important competency. The second was interpersonal skills. This is understanding other people, being able to interact with others, motivate them, get things done together, and work with people who are different than ourselves. And the third is meaning making. How do we learn from our experiences? How do we reflect on what just happened, learn the lessons that are available to learn, and put those lessons into action as we move forward in our life's journey? And when I read the theory, I thought these things were really, really interesting. As I started getting into the leadership literature and I discovered authentic leadership, the three competencies that they talked about for becoming an authentic leader were exactly the same: understanding yourself, understanding others, and learning from your experiences. So for me, this is a powerful idea. We're talking about the intersection between personal development and leadership development. And if you buy into my definition that any of us can be leaders and the process can be taught and therefore learned, we all have the potential to lead, no matter what our role, no matter what our title. So I thought this was interesting. And she went on to share that we all go through four specific phases as we go on our life's journey to be the best individual that we can be to develop these competencies. The first phase, which is between sort of birth and age 18, she called external formulas. And she defines a formula as an attitude, a belief, or a value. So the way we think or feel about things, things that we accept to be true without necessarily needing any facts, and the principles by which we guide ourselves. She called them external formulas because early in our lives, these come from the outside. They come from our parents, our mentors, teachers, clergy, other adults that we interact with, and they're almost imprinted on us. And these formulas can be very empowering and very powerful. They can also be debilitating and very negative and keep us from realizing our personal and professional potential. So I'll give you two quick examples. My wife grew up she had three siblings. They were brothers, all brothers. And her father was a typical, I guess, 1950s dad, if you will, sort of came from a patriarchal point of view. And he used to tell my wife that everything she did was good for a girl. That's good for a girl. And so she took on this external formula that what she did was good, but only to a certain point. And it really was very, very limiting. I mean, she's gone on to become a mom, a grandmother, a very successful psychotherapist. And it's been an external formula that she's had to sort of unlearn in order to realize her potential. For me, I was raised with an undiagnosed learning disability. And every time my parents went to parent-teacher conference, the math teacher would say, Ronnie's pretty bright, but he's not trying hard enough. And if he would only try hard, he would get better. He's kind of lazy and not that bright when it comes to certain topics. And I internalized that belief. I thought I was lazy and stupid because I couldn't understand math. And it wasn't until my daughter was born and diagnosed with a learning disability herself, and I had to learn how to advocate and support her, that I realized that um, I'm actually quite bright and capable. I just learn differently than other people. And so that external formula was very, very difficult. And so I would encourage you, as you hear this for the first time, to think about the formulas, the attitudes, the beliefs, and values that you got from others that are serving you, and try to think about some that might be preventing you from realizing your leadership potential. When we get out into the world at about 18, whether we move out of our homes or we go to work or we go to school, we reach what Magolda called the crossroads. And the crossroads is a place where we experience cognitive dissonance. It's a feeling that what we know to be true is suddenly changed by new information. And at the crossroads, the key decision that we have to make is, do we want to be a prisoner of the past or a pioneer of the future? We get out into the world and we see that some of these things that we were told to be true may not be true, or the beliefs that we have may not be true. If you grow up in a house where there's racial bias, as an example, and you grow up having a belief about people who look different than you, and you get out into the world and you experience those people in a different way, that's the cognitive dissonance. And we have a choice to carry that external formula forward or move to the next phase of the journey, which Magolda called self-authoring. And the reason she called it self-authoring is a bit evident. It's that we get to write our own story. We get to think about things differently. And the things that drive us through these phases are what she called developmentally effective experiences. These are difficult things. Times when we make mistakes, times when we fail, times when we see people or processes or things that are different than we expected. And these experiences, if we're paying attention, foster this cognitive dissonance and prompt us to explore and reflect and ultimately grow from our experiences if we're aware and we're paying attention. When we move from the third phase let me just talk about what it means to take advantage of developmentally effective experiences. This is a work by David Kolb, and he studied how we learn from our experiences. And he talks about four things that happen around reflection. And so the first thing is we take an action and something happens. And then he encourages us to reflect on that experience. What worked well? What didn't work? How did I feel? Positive or negative? What would I do differently if I had the opportunity to do it again? And then to really, after reflecting, zero in on what are the lessons that can be learned from whatever just happened, a difficult conversation, a failed implementation, a missed step in an organizational culture. And then what specifically am I going to try to do differently so that I can make meaning from my experience to that third competency that is so important in both self-authoring and developing as authentic leaders. And so I sort of boil this down to what, so what, now what? What just happened? So what does it matter? And now what am I going to do about it? And this is the sort of propellant that helps us develop our interpersonal competencies and make meaning from our experience. It takes practice, but it's a model that I think I would encourage you to think about if you want to take on some of the ideas that we're talking about this afternoon. After practicing these things and writing our own story, we kind of get to phase 4 and later stages in life. Our formulas have changed, and now they're internal. We've written our own story. We've hopefully grown from our experiences. We've shed some of those attitudes and beliefs and values that haven't served us. And now we have an opportunity to share with others, whether they work with us or for us or their children or grandchildren or friends. We can take the wisdom that we can only gain from living our lives to the fullest and share that back. And so that's sort of the last and final phase of this self-authoring set of steps that Golda talks about. So that is a superpower, because if we're paying attention and we understand that how we think and feel can be changed from our experiences, and that some things that we brought with us don't make sense and others do, that gives us flexibility and options for really improving as we move through our lives and our experiences. The second superpower that I want to share is about emotional intelligence. And this is another aspect of how we can work on our authentic leadership competencies. When we think about emotional intelligence, thinking about our makeup, there are three sort of components that make us who we are. The first is IQ, and IQ is something that many of us are familiar with. It's cognitive intelligence. It's defined as our ability to learn, and it's relatively fixed from birth. I mean, how we can get better at subjects by making an attempt, but how we learn, the research says, is pretty fixed. Our personality style is also relatively stable for life. This is about whether we're introverted or extroverted. Do we get energy from meeting new people, or do we get exhausted from meeting new people? Do we like speaking in public, or don't we like speaking in public? We can practice styles that are different than our comfort zone, but the things that we're born with and the styles that we have are pretty stable for life. The third piece in our makeup, EQ, or emotional intelligence, is the one area that can be learned. This is our ability to understand and leverage our emotions and manage our behavior and our relationships. And this is a really important concept, which is why I find it to be a superpower relative to developing your leadership potential. EQ has two competencies: personal competencies and social competencies. And there are two skills for each. When we think about our personal competence, we think about self-awareness. Do we understand our feelings? Can we manage them? Can we be responsive rather than reactive? And how do we manage in times of stress? Those are our personal competencies as it relates to emotional intelligence. The social competencies are about our degree of awareness in a room. Can we read the room? Do we know what's happening in a group dynamic? And how do we manage our relationships? Two important things here. One, only 36% of the people, the research says, can identify their emotions in real time. And that's really important because that means there's a significant opportunity to grow and be different from others as we develop our ability to understand our emotions and manage them. And I think more importantly, EQ accounts for 50% of all performance in job reviews. Whether or not it's called EQ, whether or not the competencies in your job descriptions are written in a way that uh, uh, make you aware that we're looking at how you manage your feelings and how you manage your relationships. The research says 50% of how you're going to be evaluated is based on these concepts, which is why I think it's so important that we try to understand emotional intelligence and develop our capabilities accordingly. Leadership's not just improved by EQ, it's actually fueled by it. So I want to talk for a couple of minutes about this concept. The first important thing is to understand that feelings are signals. And the way that our brain works, we experience our feelings first before we can do critical thinking. And that means that these signals, if they're too powerful, can actually drive our behavior and put us in a difficult situation socially or professionally. So if we get a happy signal, we could start dancing and jumping up and down, and that could be positive. If we get a sad signal and we let that signal drive our behavior, we could have a tantrum, which is not going to be necessarily, well received by our friends and colleagues and others. If we get angry, we could go as far as to slapping somebody. And so I think when I talk about this, just think about Will Smith jumping up on the stage and slapping Chris Rock. That is an example of what emotional intelligence should not look like. That is an example of letting a very strong feeling drive one's behavior and not taking a beat to think about that feeling and examine options and implications before taking action. Fear could cause us to run. It could cause us to shut down and not speak to others, not share our feelings, not engage in a way that's productive or otherwise positive. And shame is a massive feeling that makes us withdraw from others and hide. And, shame is one of these feelings that is only powerful in the dark. Once we can talk about these things and share them and express ourselves and respond appropriately, these feelings can be diminished and put into perspective and not force us into a difficult situation. So, learning to recognize these things, only 36% of the people do. So that means only 36% of the people can actually be self-aware enough to manage their behavior in a difficult circumstance. And I'm sure we can all think of people who let their feelings drive their behaviors and otherwise get them into a difficult spot. So the first thing about EQ and self-awareness is starting to see these feelings as signals, not necessarily things that are good or bad. Once we can experience them, then we have a choice in terms of acknowledging. And this is work by Brene Brown, who I love. She wrote a book called Atlas of the Heart, which is an incredible guide to dealing with our emotions. And she typically asks herself two questions. The first is, do I have enough information to freak out? And she says, and I agree, the answer is normally no. The second, more important question is, will freaking out help? And the answer is always no. So it's so important to start to understand these signals and think about these two questions. A couple of ideas for managing them. The first is just breathing. The limbic system will calm down, feelings will pass in time, and just getting centered, breathing deeply in and out for a period of time will calm those feelings and allow us to get past that and think about our options in a particular situation. The second big idea is just sleeping on it. When I'm getting a big signal of frustration or anger, fear, oftentimes that is not the moment to engage in trying to figure out what, if anything, can be done about it. Our brain and our subconscious works overnight. So when we sleep on things, we often wake up in the morning with fresh ideas. Certainly some of those feelings will have subsided, and we can think more logically and critically about what we're going to do. There are tons of ways to deal with feelings as signals. These are two really basic ones that I would offer for your consideration if you decide you want to think about these things more deeply. The big idea is moving from reactive to responsive. So rather than being impulsive and jumping on the stage and slapping somebody, taking a beat to deliberate as to what your choices are, what the options and implications may be for a variety of choices. The second is practicing learning not to react to words, but reacting to meaning. And this is so important in the age of text messages and emails. I remember when my son was young, he came at me, he's like 5 or 6, and he's like, "I hate you." And in that moment, I had an opportunity to give him a lecture about hate and why my role as father should not be eliciting that kind of response. But the real response was the underlying meaning for what triggered that response, and that is, what's going on with you? How can I help you? How can I be supportive? And so just not reacting to words and taking a minute to think about what's going on with somebody and what they mean may be a useful strategy for managing signals. And the last idea here is not reacting with blame, but responding with accountability. Blame is just the release of frustration and anger. Often people do it for reasons other than what's going on in the moment. When we feel like blaming somebody and we know that it's a reaction to anger and frustration, the idea is to think about our accountability and being vulnerable enough to admit that we may be causing some of the stress and problems, and certainly laying it on to somebody else is not going to be helpful in the moment or in the future as it relates to managing our relationships effectively. So as we kind of close on this topic and get ready to open it up for Q&A, just some strategies. Self-awareness. Don't treat feelings as good or bad. Like, I grew up in a house where happiness was the only feeling. Being sad, being angry, being frustrated were somehow not helpful, not cool, not acceptable. They're just signals. And lean into your discomfort, know what pushes your buttons, try to understand why you do the things you do, seek feedback from people who you trust, who can help you as you learn to take these signals in and be responsive rather than reactive. From a self-management point of view, breathing really helps. Controlling that negative self-talk. Thinking about freedoms and not limitations. Often when we're frustrated, we see things in our way as blockers, and we don't feel like there are options and implications to learn something, to make something happen. Counting to 10, sleeping on things will let the feelings subside a little bit. And I always like to ask myself when I'm most frustrated, what is the lesson I can be learning here? The universe is trying to teach me something. That's why I'm feeling the signal. How can I learn? How can I take the what, so what, now what approach to really get through a difficult time and make meaning from the experience? It takes practice. we have to fake it till we make it. And just being aware of that might help you make the first step. On the social side, timing is everything. If you have to have a difficult conversation with somebody, whether you're frustrated in the moment or not, make sure there aren't distractions, that you leave enough time to interact in a way that's appropriate, to deal with the feelings, to make meaning from your experience. When you're getting into a meeting situation, if you're uncomfortable, have some questions ready to ask to break the ice. What brings you here? What do you like about working for this company? What's the biggest lesson that you've learned? Who's your favorite leader? Plan for social gatherings. When you have an opportunity to meet senior people in a client situation or a work situation, make an intentional effort to get a conversation going and take advantage of that situation. Try to be present and try to be empathetic when dealing with other people who may be having a difficult time. On the relationship side, be curious. Take feedback well. Acknowledge other people's frustrations. Explain your decisions. Oftentimes, as a leader, I make decisions that people get frustrated about, but they don't always understand the context within which I'm making that decision. It doesn't mean they will ultimately agree or not, but I do find it helpful to at least allow people the time to have some perspective about why the decisions that I make in my leadership role are made. And hopefully that will help them see things from a different point of view. And then don't avoid the difficult conversations. Make time for them and dig in, because when we have the difficult conversations and we resolve our feelings and solve problems, we foster trust, we build effective relationships, and everybody gets better as a result. And I think here the idea is nobody's too small to be leading. It doesn't matter what your title is or your role. And so if you think you're too small to be effective, think about the mosquito. That's a tiny little thing that can, change the tide of, change the mood in a moment. So I'll leave you with this final thought. Audre Lorde's a poet. I love her work. And she says, it's not our differences that divide us. It's our inability to recognize, accept, celebrate, and leverage those differences. If we're going to be authentic leaders, it means everybody's going to do it in their own way. And the collective is going to be much more powerful than any individual, especially in some of the times that we have today with just the polarized discourse going on. Let's try to recognize differences, accept and celebrate them. Think about your formulas and writing your story and leveraging emotional intelligence to help you to be the best human that you can be, as well as the best leader that you can be. So with that, I appreciate your listening this afternoon, and I would love to see if we can continue the conversation, Julie, maybe with some questions or your feedback and thoughts.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, thank you so much. I thought that was a fantastic presentation. Such important points as leadership has evolved from 20 years ago to where we are now. And you really hit on some key points there. I remember being a young leader, and something I was very concerned about was how happy were the people that I was leading. And in your book, you make a statement in there that was really impactful to me that I'd love to chat about. It says, happiness is not a relevant goal or success factor for strategic projects, especially when large, diverse stakeholders are involved. What do you mean by that when you say happiness isn't as important? Because when I was a young leader, I thought, oh, I have to keep everyone happy.
Yeah, me too. And it became very difficult. I ran a transformation at the duty-free shops. I was the CIO. We had stores all over the world where people came and shopped to buy luxury goods and liquor and local treats. And after 9/11, our sales dropped in half. And I was a member of the leadership team, and we were told we had to cut expenses 50% in 90 days or we were going to lose the business. And we went about doing that, and it was very difficult. And nobody was happy, even though we cut 50% of our costs. We laid off hundreds of people. They were unhappy. We kept hundreds of people. They were unhappy because they didn't have the services and their friends around to continue to do work the way they did before. The owners were happy because we saved the business, but they were unhappy because profitability wasn't what it needed to be. And so what I learned in that experience, and what I mean by happiness is not the goal, is that everyone decides what happiness means to them. And I can't make them happy or not happy. What I can do is set very clearly defined expectations. We are going to cut expenses in half. We are going to transform the business, and it is going to be difficult. And if we can meet or exceed those expectations, then we can declare success. And if we chase making people happy, I just have found that that's a kind of a recipe to be continuously unhappy as a leader. So that's what I mean by that.
Well, I appreciate that because I think that oftentimes as leaders, we think it's our responsibility to keep everyone happy. And like you said, changes happen. You can't always keep everyone happy. And so I think that's so important. There's a lot of questions asking about toxic work environments. And as a leader, when do you stay? When do you leave? How do you navigate that when you're in a toxic work environment as a leader?
That's a great question. And so, first of all, toxic work environments tend to come from the top. And so, one has to take stock of whether or not they have an influence to influence that toxicity. Sometimes an individual's external formulas about how they think they manage people and how they take care of or don't take care of people is going to drive that internal culture. And so we have a choice to stay or to go. If we stay, we have to accept some of those limitations and do the best that we can in that context for whatever reason it is that we're staying there. I got to pay the rent. I've got to meet a certain milestone. I need to get a bonus. But we always have a choice to move on to another organization or a company that has a different culture. I would say a couple of things. Ask questions about culture when you're in a job interview. Ask people to tell you what the culture is like, and to try to get some insights as to whether or not that meets with what you expect and where you think that you would thrive. I also think it's very, very difficult to try to change somebody's perspective who is leveraging roles-based power and has no interest in your opinion or otherwise wants to make a change. And so I think it's important, if you're in a toxic culture, to recognize that that's the case, and then realize you have a choice as an individual, and taking action on those choices requires courage, but it's very, very difficult to change the toxic culture from the bottom of the organization. That's my experience.
Mm. I agree. And on that topic, I don't know if you've ever read Erin Meyer's book, The Culture Map. That was a really eye-opening experience to me because she talks about leaders dealing with diverse cultures, which really interacts with what you talk about in your book. And one of the things she talks about is leaders need to read the air around them. And I thought that was really important. And so my question was, how do you read the air around you as a leader when you're working on these diverse big projects with so many people?
It's a great question. I mean, I think what comes to my mind is emotional intelligence. And first of all, understanding my own feelings and managing them effectively, and then reading the room and understanding from an individual perspective how they're feeling, what their goals and aspirations are, what they're expecting of me as a leader, and making sure they understand what I expect of them so that we can align those expectations, whether they're happy or they're not. I think that is really important. I also make it very clear that I welcome disagreement. I want diverse perspectives on any decision that needs to be made. But once that decision is made, I expect commitment.
Mm.
And I'm fine with people disagreeing and committing. And that allows them to know that I've heard them, to acknowledge that they have a different opinion, and to invite them to join us on the journey. And if I'm right, they're going to learn something. If I'm wrong, I will learn something. And so if we can have this idea of separating agreement and commitment and allowing people to disagree and commit, we can foster a loop of just continuous learning and getting everybody aligned and moving forward. If people can't disagree and commit, then I'm going to help them find someplace else to be, because those are the people that are toxic and just foster crazy making. And, everyone else knows it, and it's a leader's job to deal with that.
Mm. That kind of goes right along with another question that just popped up here from someone who's halfway through your book. And they said, you discuss breakthroughs versus breakdowns and emphasize the importance of psychological safety, allowing your team to be vulnerable about their failures. So, as a leader, I know it's a thin line that we walk about showing our vulnerability at the same time being leaders. How do you balance that?
I don't even know that I try to be balanced. I think if I'm going to be accountable as a leader, that means I have to admit when I make a mistake, and I have to admit when we're going in the wrong direction. And I have to admit that the assumptions that I used going into something were wrong, and things have changed. And so that's what I'm talking about when I talk about vulnerability. And I'm not sure it's about balance as much as it is just about being authentic in and real about what's going on. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I think it humanizes us as leaders to show our vulnerability. And I think it builds trust. You talk a lot about that in the book. And kind of a second part to this question they asked was, when you're dealing with high pressure and high stakes careers, how do you build that safety with people, meaning that someone feels comfortable coming, which you've kind of answered part of that to you and saying that they disagree. And then how do you move forward from that point, right? Where they're like, if you're disagreeing, both of you are disagreeing, how do you move forward to the next step? Which I know you talk a little bit about that in your chapter on change requires change and the process you take the 6 steps through that.
I think, you have to have some kind of a RACI matrix: responsibility, accountability, confer, and inform. At the end of the day, there has to be an individual who will break the tie and ultimately make a decision. And that individual needs to be respected. And that's where I kind of come back to disagree and commit. And I'm not going to be in a scenario where I'm just going to argue continuously to try to persuade somebody that I'm right and they're wrong. It's really about being effective. And one of the more important lessons I learned was from a boss that I did not like very much. And uh, he was hired to transform an organization where I was the CIO, and I knew he was going to bring in a leadership team and replace me. I was a bit annoyed about that, and was not managing my feelings particularly well. And he called me in his office and he said, "Listen, what's more important to you, to be right or effective?"
Hmm.
And it was profound because I wanted to be right, and he's like, "There are 5 different ways to do this, and you got to get with the program and be helpful. Otherwise, you're not going to be welcome." And so, uh, thinking about being effective and encouraging people and acknowledging differences of opinion, but getting people to commit, I think is very important. And you mentioned breakdown and breakthrough. Just quickly, I define a breakthrough as something people think is impossible before you get started. And that means the certainty of being successful is relatively low, but the value of achieving that breakthrough is significant if we can be successful. And because the certainty is unclear, there are going to be breakdowns. We're going to make assumptions that aren't really right. The world is going to change. Competition is going to come at us. People are going to be difficult. And so recognizing when we hit the wall, that's where I like to say, let's just declare a breakdown. Let's evaluate where we are. Let's look at the facts. Let's look at our assumptions. Let's modify the course if required. Let's remove people if they're in the way. And let's learn from our experience on the journey and deal with a breakdown as an opportunity to get better and move towards a breakthrough, as opposed to shaming people when they make a mistake, or shaming them when they get stuck, or blaming them when things don't go our way. Those kinds of behaviors are what creates a toxic culture and keeps people from wanting to go for breakthroughs because they're afraid. And if you have a fear-based culture, it's impossible to get to breakthroughs. People don't want to do it because the leader is not fostering an environment where that's welcome.
Yeah, I agree. Fear is such a negative factor within organizations. And I've experienced that as well, where we want to be honest with leadership, but we can't because we're fearful of what will happen to us. And you mentioned earlier about this leadership was bringing in a group and how, they were asking you whether you wanted to be right or effective. And we were talking about change earlier. before we got on, and I thought your process was really interesting. In the book, in your chapter 4, talks about change requires change, and you say that there's 6 stages. And this really resonated with me, not only being a leader and dealing with change, but also having to have change when I wasn't a leader. And you say that the stages are anxiety, anticipation, fear, depression, commitment, meaning making. How do you help your people when that process hits, right? And I see a lot of examples in your book where you're brought in to make change. So you have to do this over and over. How do you get your people from anxiety to stage 6, meaning making?
Can I show you a slide really quick that might be helpful?
Yeah.
I know this is dangerous that I'm taking a shot at this, but let me try. Okay. So this is research by Kubler-Ross around loss, but I really like it from a change management point of view. And she talks about time on the horizontal axis and how we're feeling or our morale on the vertical. And when we go into a new situation at the beginning, we have expectations and assumptions, and typically we're a little bit nervous because we don't know, but we're hopeful that things are going to be great. And we kind of move to anticipation and we get into the flow. And so often we realize what we thought was going to happen is not exactly right, whether it's a new relationship, a new project, a new company. And so then we start to get nervous and a bit fearful in phase 3. And ultimately, if things don't change, we can drop to phase 4, which is we can be depressed. And she calls that the valley of despair. And the key point is, one, recognize how you feel, and two, never quit when you're in the valley of despair. No matter how hard it gets, find a way to commit to learning from the experience. What is the lesson I could be learning? How can I deal with my feelings and work within the context that I must operate, and committing to make the best of the situation. And then once you've made progress, reflecting on how you got there in the first place. Why were your assumptions necessarily wrong? What were you told that made you think something that turned out not to be true? How do you avoid that in the future? And when you get to that meaning making stage, then you can make a decision that is an informed decision and not a fear-based decision to run because it didn't turn out exactly as you had hoped.
Mm. That's fantastic. And I love that. I'm sure everyone here has experienced change in their life, whether personally and professionally. And it seems like you could apply this in both areas, personally and professionally, as the change is happening within that, especially when you talk about the valley of despair. I actually like that because when I think from an entrepreneurship perspective, many entrepreneurs hit the valley of despair very often in that space. So that is wonderful.
And
We
to your point, Julie, I mean, we're all going through 50 of these curves at the same time.
Yeah.
I have a new job. I'm in a relationship. My kid's starting a new school, and it's complex. It could be overwhelming, and just acknowledging, man, I'm there, and asking for help from people that you care about and that you trust. It's amazing how powerful the community can be in the interpersonal side of things to kind of help you through it. So I thank you for that question. I hope that that was helpful.
Yeah. And there's a lot of questions about emotional intelligence, and this always piques my interest. Being a former athlete, professional athlete, emotional intelligence was something that, as they say the joke, there's no crying in baseball, right? It was very much pounded into us that there's no crying. Then when I entered into the workforce 20 plus years ago, that was kind of the same sentiment. And so a really good question is, how do you develop EI within your teams? I know a downfall of mine as a leader was that I had to work on my emotional intelligence. I looked at it like, hey, suck it up, get over it, you're fine, because that was the training that I had received. So I had to really retrain myself to have emotional intelligence for my people when I was becoming a leader or learning to be a leader. So how do you help implement that? Especially, I know you work a lot in the tech space. Is there room for emotional intelligence in that high level tech space?
Well, I think emotional intelligence is essential, um, which is a little bit different than how we present our feelings and emotions when we're having them.
Mhm.
right? The Chris Rock thing
Mhm.
is that's what it looks like when you let your feelings drive your behavior. You might be a competitive athlete and feeling very fearful or uncomfortable about something that you're about to do. And yeah, you learn to set those aside, compartmentalize, and push through to exceed the ultimate objective. I think at the end of that, the meaning making experience is, hey, why did I feel that way? And how did I get through this? And what can I learn from that so that next time I may not feel as fearful, or I may be able to leverage this experience to make it easier next time. And I think it really comes down to, for me, setting a culture where diverse opinions are welcome, and understanding that once a decision is made, you can disagree and commit. Allowing people to express their feelings, share when they're frustrated, share when they're angry, recognizing I can't necessarily make them feel differently, but I can acknowledge that and maybe change an assignment, put them into a slightly different role. Some people get very anxious with change, and they're not the people you want to be change agents. They're people that you want to be in a role that they're very comfortable with, that can deliver value on an ongoing basis, and not necessarily uh, be driven by ambiguity that might make them crazy. There are people who are change agents who you put them in a highly valued role where you're not allowing them to learn from their experience and not allowing them to create structure and deal with ambiguity, and they're going to be bored and quit on you. So I think some of it, and I talk about skill and will in the book, it's around how to identify four archetypes of skill and will. Are you a blocked learner? Are you a high potential person? Are you a change agent? Are you highly valued? And recognizing, based on a person's personality type and tolerance to deal with their feelings, what is the best role for them to be in for themselves and for the organization.
That's so important. I agree because, like I said, I mean, all transparency. I struggled at having emotional intelligence when I first came because that's what I was trained not to have emotional intelligence, and really not to be open to other people to have it. It made me incredibly uncomfortable if someone was crying. I
Mm.
didn't know how to deal with that as a leader, and so it's obviously changed so much over the last 20 plus years of how we behave as leaders in the organization. And I think we have time for one more question. Nancy and Heather, just let me know if I need to cut it shorter. But another question that they had was, one of the last ones was, how do you be an authentic leader across different countries and cultures, which I know you did with several different companies. And that's probably a bit of a loaded question. You could probably talk about that for a long time. But maybe you have a short version of kind of how you adapted your authentic leadership within global situations.
Yeah, I mean, I was terrible early in my career, and I made so many mistakes that informed my current perspective. But I'll just give you an example. The bottom line answer is you have to listen,
Mm.
and you have to understand the culture within which you're operating. And so when I went to Asia, I didn't understand the concept of the group and how important that was. And that, you don't fire members of the group, and members of the group will not speak out positively or negatively because they want to save face and not embarrass others or embarrass themselves. Well, as a Western guy, I go into a group meeting and I'm asking everybody what they think and what they would do if they were me. And it was total silence. And until I understood one-on-one and built some relationships, and somebody said, why are you asking us what we think? We brought you over from America. You're supposed to have the answers. We all think you're an idiot. And so, that was a very powerful lesson for me. And I think when I'm dealing now in different cultural dynamics, whether it's a company culture or a country culture, it's important to understand the formulas, the attitudes, the beliefs, and the values that drive that circumstance, and then deciding within that whether I can be effective or not, and what things will help me move the needle, whether it's moving it a little bit or moving it a lot. And I would say, for me personally, that's the most important thing. You need to listen more than you speak. My grandfather said, God gave you two ears and one mouth because you're supposed to listen twice as much as you talk. And I didn't understand that when I was a youngster. And I'm getting better. I'm not all the way there, but I'm getting much, much better.
Oh, well, thank you so much, Dr. Ron. I think we're coming to a close of time. I do want to encourage everyone to please grab the book, Lead for Change. I got to read it this weekend and it was fantastic and powerful. And I love the experiences you shared. It just continued to help me grow as a leader myself. So I'll pass it on off to you, Nancy.
Thank you so much. I mean, what an impressive presentation. I just love that we have two alums and with Julie's background and just, great questions. I think our audience really just had a treat as a great webinar in leadership and really thinking outside the box as far as how you present things in a really practical manner that, people will bring to the workplace with them. It will give them a lot to contemplate after this evening. But thank you so much for all of our audience. Ron Glickman and Julie Ducharme, so happy to have you as NU alums. Really proud of your career, Ron, and knowing that a lot of your background and your learnings you have shared and with your entire organization. And both of you often present, and I think all our listeners will be interested in connecting with you. So thank you so much. And what I'd like to do at this time is just share some upcoming activities for our alum. Again, thank you for everyone who joined us. But important month, we have National Mentoring Month this month, and that's a wonderful way for our alum to give back to current students, for students to learn from alum, and we've had some great sessions regarding mentoring. So we've got one that is taking place this week on healthcare, and then another one next week on the power of mentorship and transformation. Excited about our upcoming speaker series on February 13th. Smarter Minds, your network is your net worth. So I hope all of you can join us for that. We've got an alumni association meeting coming up. Navigator Network will be sending out our newsletter, probably around the February 13th or 14th, but just special thanks to everyone. Also, I'm really honored that Eric Rowe, the Dean of our College of Business, Engineering, and Technology, was able to join us this evening. So thank you, have a good evening, and really appreciate our speaker, Ron Glickman, and our moderator, Julie Ducharme. Thank you to Heather and Lindsay for helping with all the back end things and coordinating our NU speaker series. Appreciate you.
Thank you.